On the morning of April 11th, 1945, Task Force Wellborn of the 3rd Armored Division rolled into Nordhausen, Germany. Intelligence had warned them to expect something a bit unusual near Kohnstein Mountain. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared American soldiers for what they were about to find. First, they entered Bull Casern, an old Luftwaffe barracks on the outskirts of town. Sergeant Rajin Ferris, 329th Medical Battalion, walked through the entrance. He saw 1,300 to 2,000 bodies scattered across the warehouse floors. Skeletal survivors lying among the corpses. He would later write, the largest group of dead bodies I had ever seen in one place. Hours later, patrols found camouflaged entrances in Kohnstein Mountain. They descended into tunnels. Electric lights still functioning. Double rail tracks still operational. Ventilation systems humming. As if the factory had stopped for lunch. Galleries extending 6,200 feet through solid rock. 46 connecting chambers. And there, in rows that seemed infinite, 250 V-2 rockets in various stages of assembly. Engines, fuel tanks, control fins, contropes. The most advanced weapons factory in the world. Buried under a German mountain. The V-2, Vergeltungswaffe 2, Retaliation Weapon 2. The first operational ballistic missile in history. Range 186 miles. Speed 3,400 miles per hour. Flew above the stratosphere. Impacts in London killed approximately 5,000 to 9,000 civilians. But here's the number nobody knew in 1945. Building these rockets killed 20,000 to 26,500 prisoners at Mittelbau Dora and subcamps. More than double. The V-2 is the only weapon in history that killed more people in its production than in its use against the enemy. When American soldiers discovered Middlework on April 11th, 1945, they didn't just find rockets. They found the technology that, evacuated before Soviet arrival, transported in 341 rail cars to White Sands, New Mexico, would become the direct foundation of the American space program. Redstone, Jupiter, Saturn V, Apollo 11, the Moon. Everything started here, in tunnels built by slaves, under a German mountain, with 20,000 bodies buried around it. If you want to see how the greatest American technological triumph was born from the worst Nazi crime, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to April 11th, 1945. Flashback. October 3rd, 1942. Peenemünde, Baltic Coast. German Army Research Center. Wernher von Braun, 30 years old, brilliant engineer, dreamer of space travel. Walter Dornberger, general, pragmatist. A 4-rocket lifts off. Reaches 50 miles altitude. 120 miles range. First human object to touch space. Von Braun told colleagues, today the space rocket was born. But Hitler saw a weapon. He renamed A4 to V2. Ordered mass production. Night of August 17th to 18th, 1943. RAF executes Operation Hydra. 596 bombers over Peenemünde. Devastation. Hundreds of workers and technicians killed. Speer, Minister of Armaments, and Himmler decide V2 production must go underground. Bomb-proof. They find a location, Kohnstein Mountain, Thuringia. Former gypsum mine with giant tunnels built in 1937 to 40 as fuel depot. Perfect. Impenetrable. And it will be built by slaves. SS General Hans Kammler, civil engineer. Responsible for building Auschwitz-Birkenau, Majdanek, other extermination camps. August 1943, he receives orders to transform Kohnstein into underground factory. He creates state company, Middlework GmbH. Method, slave labor until death. Production quota, 12,000 V2s. Labor force, prisoners from Buchenwald. First transport, 107 men, August 1943. Then thousands. Eventually 60,000 passed through Mittelbau Dora and subcamps. Michel de Pierre, Nouillon, France, factory worker. Member of the Maquis, French resistance. July 1944, arrested by Gestapo. Tortured at Compiègne. Deported to Buchenwald, then Dora. September 15th, 1944. He arrives at Mittelbau Dora, assigned to work in Middlework tunnels. He later wrote, from September 15, 1944 to beginning of April 1945, I was in the most cruel hell. 2 main tunnels, A and B, each 6,200 feet long. S-curve through the mountain, 46 connecting galleries, each gallery 500 feet long. Double rail track in each main tunnel. Galleries 21 through 42, V2 assembly. Galleries 1 through 20, Junkers engine production. Galleries 43 through 46, initially prisoner dormitories, later V1 production line. Gallery 41, 50 feet high, giant crane to lift V2 vertical for final tests. Constant temperature, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Rock dust, explosions to open new tunnels. Inadequate ventilation. Smell of oil, explosives, excrement, death. De Pierre's testimony, 12 hours per day or night, 18 hours. When we rotate team, we must carry on our back extremely heavy equipment in and out of the tunnel. Loads, fuel tanks, engines, steel structures. On their backs. Up ramps. Running under shouts and blows from SS and Kapos. With almost nothing in our stomach, under rain, snow, mud, in extremely cold weather, clothed in poor outfit, wood clogs with fabric on top which get hooked in everything. First months, August 1943 to spring 1944, prisoners slept inside the tunnels. Galleries 43 through 46, wooden bunks stacked. No natural light. No adequate ventilation. Gypsum dust in lungs. Explosive smoke. Smell of excrement, open buckets as latrines. Contaminated water. Diseases, tuberculosis, dysentery, pneumonia. Witness Noah Klieger. 4 levels of bunks. No sanitation. Water brought from outside in contaminated containers. November 4th, 1943. Hall 2, main tunnel. Production stopped. Orders. All department heads and SS gathered. 12 prisoners accused of sabotage. Hands tied. Pieces of wood in mouths. Piano wire nooses around necks. Lifted slowly by industrial cranes. Strangled. Not hanged quickly, lifted slowly until suffocation. Bodies hung for 12 hours. 2 consecutive work shifts forced to pass beneath them. Arthur Rudolph, technical production director, present. He operationalized the terror. He walked to the hall. He commented that bodies would stay there exactly to terrorize the next shifts. Middlework production August 1944 to March 1945. Approximately 5,789 complete V2s. Goal, 900 per month. Never reached, but peaked at 600 to 700. Each rocket, 46 feet tall, 27,500 pounds, engine producing 55,000 pounds thrust. Technology decades ahead. But human cost, 60,000 prisoners used in Mittelbau complex. 20,000 to 26,500 dead. Most from exhaustion, disease, executions, final death marches. Historian Michael Neufold, the V2 killed at least twice as many people in its production as in its use against the enemy. Von Braun, by his own admission, visited Middlework 10 or 15 times, including fall 1943 when prisoners still slept in tunnels. responsible for quality control. He later said the working environment was absolutely dreadful. I visited Middle Work several times, including when prisoners were blasting new tunnels. It was a hellish setting. I had been in mines before, but it was evidently worse than any mine. Dora survivors gave sworn testimony years later, saying they saw him in the tunnels, sometimes in brown uniform, passing piles of corpses at the entrance. April 1945. SS began evacuating Dora. Death marches. De Pierre too weak. Nurses pushed him back to barracks. He slipped through a window, passed out in an empty room. April 11th, 1945. American soldiers entered. De Pierre woke up. First military man he saw, Canadian captain who spoke French. They distributed some food. It was so good, since we were dying of hunger for the last 9 months. Days later, evacuated by Dakota aircraft to Le Bourget de Paris. Returned to Neuilly on April 21st, 1945. Weighed half his original weight, but alive. September 1946. President Truman issues directive. Prohibit entry to USA of anyone who has been a Nazi Party member and more than nominal participant or active supporter of Nazism or militarism. Objective: prevent Nazi war criminals from finding refuge in America. Problem: the most valuable rocket scientists, Wernher von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, Kurt Debus, were exactly those deeply compromised with the regime, SS officers, party members, slave labor supervisors. O.M. Goose, Office of Military Government United States, produced honest security reports. Von Braun O.M. Goose file, SS officer and Nazi party member, a security threat. Recommendation: do not admit. But GIOI, Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, linked to War Department, had another agenda. Historian Linda Hunt, GIOA conducted systematic campaign of whitewashing, cleaning files, removing references to SS, party activities, involvement with slave labor, reformulating from dangerous to may have been SS, inward political inclinations, apolitical technician. State Department, responsible for visas, trying to apply Truman's order literally. War Department, responsible for technical intelligence, wanting rocket scientists at any cost. Historian Gerard de Groot summarized War Department ambitions versus State Department scruples. Cold War beginning, Soviet Union capturing German scientists too. Argument: if we don't take them, Soviets will. Result: State Department lost. War Department won. Operation Paperclip began. February to March 1945. Hans Kammler selects 450 to 500 key specialists from Nordhausen. Evacuates to Bavaria, Tyrol. SS orders, if capture imminent, execute scientists. Von Braun, injured in car accident, part of this group. Realizes defeat inevitable. Decides to surrender to Americans, not Soviets. May 2nd, 1945. Magnus von Braun, his brother, approaches soldier from 44th Infantry Division. Said, "My name is Magnus von Braun. My brother invented the V2. We want to surrender." Days later, von Braun, Dornberger, and Peenemünde Elite under American custody at Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Colonel Holger Toftoy, Chief of Technical Artillery Intelligence in Europe. Colonel Gervais Trichel, Chief Rocket Branch in Washington. Order: get 100 V2s to USA. Toftoy creates Special Mission V2. Major James Hamill, Logistics. Major William Bromley, Field Command. Professor Lewis Woodruff from MIT, Scientific Advisor. Mission: dismantle middlework faster than Soviets arrive. Nordhausen area would fall into Soviet occupation zone. They have weeks, maybe days. May 18th, 1945. 144th Motor Vehicle Assembly Company arrives at Middlework. Skilled mechanics. Clean tunnels. Recover German locomotives and rail cars. Assemble train system. May 22nd, 1945. First train, 40 railcars loaded with V2 parts. Next 9 days, 341 total railcars. Components sufficient to assemble 100 complete V2s. Immediate destination, Erfurt, then Antwerp, Belgium. From Antwerp, 16 Liberty ships transport to New Orleans. Final destination, White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. Everything done just before the Soviets arrived. Beyond physical rockets, technical documentation was vital. Von Braun had ordered hiding 14 tons of reports, drawings, V2 data in abandoned iron mine near Dornton. Major Robert Staver, Ordnance, Hermes Project, Pressure's German engineer, Karl Otto Fleischer. May 20th, 1945. Fleischer reveals location. May 27th, 1945. With only hours before British forces arrive, American teams excavate accesses, rescue dozens of crates of documents, send rapidly to Paris, then Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Between 115 and 126 rocket engineers receive one-year contracts as War Department special employees. Von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, Kurt Debut, others. Sent to Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands, New Mexico. Total, approximately 1,000 Germans linked to rocket program, including technicians and families, evacuated to American zone, then relocated to USA in successive waves. Von Braun rewrites his own narrative, emphasizes dream of space exploration, minimizes knowledge of conditions at Dora. April 16, 1946, first V2 launch on American soil. Launch Complex 33, White Sands. Flight technically disappointing, reached only 3.4 miles altitude before falling. But it was the beginning. Between 1946 and 1952, 67 V2s launched. Sounding rockets for cosmic rays, solar radiation, upper atmosphere, photographs of Earth from space. Program had mixed success, many explosions, but allowed Americans to learn cryogenic fueling procedures, payload integration, telemetry. A cheap rocket school because basic engineering had already been paid for in lives and Reichsmarks by Nazi Germany. 1950, von Braun team transferred to Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama. Develops Redstone, first American medium-range ballistic missile explicitly derived from V2. From this work, Jupiter Juno, which launched Explorer 1 in 1958. 1958, NASA created. Absorbs von Braun team, Redstone infrastructure, large launcher programs. 1961 to 67, Saturn 1, Saturn 1B, Saturn 5. Designed specifically to take astronauts to the moon. July 16, 1969, Saturn 5 launches Apollo 11. July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong steps on the moon. Official Saturn chronology from Marshall Space Flight Center. Studies began 1957, led by von Braun team, evolved directly from lessons learned with Redstone and Jupiter, both heirs of V2 architecture. Middlework, V2, White Sands, Redstone, Saturn V, Apollo. Direct line from genocide to the moon. Arthur Rudolph, Technical Production Director, Middlework 1943 to 45. Responsible for assembly line using thousands of Dora prisoners. Witnessed 12 hangings November 4th, 1943. Operationalized terror. After war, brought to USA via paperclip. Became key manager of Saturn V. 1969, Saturn V takes Apollo 11 to moon. Rudolph equals American hero. 1979, publication of book by former prisoner condemning Rudolph. DOJ Office of Special Investigations opens inquiry. 1984, OSI concludes more than sufficient to prove aiding and abetting in persecution of forced laborers. Rudolph signs agreement, voluntarily renounces American citizenship, returns to West Germany. Died without ever being tried. After war, Dora camp used by Americans to house liberated forced laborers. July 1945, handed over to German authorities. 1950s, almost all barrack buildings demolished. Crematorium remained. Early 1950s, first monument. 1964, site officially designated Dora Memorial. 1990s, after reunification, complete reorientation, partial reopening of tunnels in 1995, critical exhibitions. Michel DePierre and other survivors visited Huntsville, Alabama in the 1990s and 2000s to tell their stories. Confront official memory that revered von Braun without mentioning 20,000 dead. 1950s to 60s, official American rhetoric about von Braun emphasized space visionary, ignoring Dora. 1980s to 90s, texts like Wonder Weapons and Slave Labor by Michael Neufeld, Smithsonian, explain in detail that V-2 was produced with slave labor, von Braun knew. NASA history monographs acknowledge more people died building V-2 than were killed by impacts. No formal institutional apology from NASA to Dora victims, but clear recognition in official history publications of connection between American space program and Middleworks' bloody legacy. V-2 established basic architecture of all subsequent ballistic missiles, liquid fuel, turbopump, gyroscopes, aerodynamic control via fins. Redstone, Atlas, Titan, Minuteman, all direct descendants. American military museums recognize V-2 was the model for intermediate and intercontinental range ballistic missiles of the Cold War. Capture of V-2 and von Braun team made Nazi Germany years ahead of allies in rocket engineering at war's end. Special Mission V-2 and Operation Paperclip established precedent. Cold War justifies sheltering former Nazis. USSR did same, captured German scientists, documents, equipment in Soviet occupation zone. US-USSR space race was partly competition between former Nazi engineers working for opposite sides. Sputnik 1957, Explorer 1 1958, Gagarin 1961, Apollo 11 1969, all built on foundation of Peenemünde and Mittelwerk. Today, Mittelbau Dora is memorial administered by Buchenwald Foundation. Tunnels partially accessible. Exhibitions show working conditions, hangings, 20,000 dead. In Huntsville, Alabama, there's U.S. Space and Rocket Center celebrating von Braun and Saturn V. 2 memorials, 1 history. No reconciliation. Saturn V on launch pad at Cape Canaveral equals maximum symbol of human triumph. But it was built by men who supervised Dora's hell. Historian Michael Neufeld, the V-2 is a singular weapon because it killed at least twice as many people in its production as in its use. April 11, 1945. American soldiers entered Mittelwerk tunnels. Found 250 V-2s in assembly, technology of the future, built by 20,000 dead. Evacuated 341 rail cars before Soviets arrived. Brought 100 V-2s to White Sands. Brought von Braun and 126 engineers. Cleaned SS files. Launched 67 V-2s between 1946 and 52. Developed Redstone, Jupiter, Saturn. Took Apollo 11 to Moon in 1969. The greatest technological achievement of humanity was built on the greatest industrial crime of humanity. This is not metaphor. This is direct line. Mittelwerk to NASA. 20,000 dead slaves to 12 men on the moon. This is the story nobody wants to tell. But it's the real story. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about underground factories built by slaves. Rocket scientists who supervise death. The price of progress nobody calculates. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure the 20,000 who died at Mittelbau-Dora are not forgotten. Thank you for making sure we remember that the Saturn V that took us to the moon was built on their bodies. These people deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.